to, well, an old loo. It was for tram workers, so one of Sheffield's finest. You can spare your blushes. The old loos and fixtures and fittings are long gone. Have a nosy around. You know you want to. Look up there on the roof. What an exotic creature. That's certainly the most ornate bird I've ever seen. There must be more to this than meets the eye. A woman arrives from afar, a mystery man, a bunch of tools, and a curious bird. We must get to the bottom of this. So let's get moving. We've got some detective work to do.
I heard an interview on the radio with Stan Shaw. It was probably playing in the background.
I recognise that voice. Yep, that's Grace.
And for the past 53 years, he's been making knives by hand in Sheffield.
I mean, I made a knife for the Queen, and I met the Queen. She shook my hand, and it's tremendous.
I remember the sheer amazement. Something about the way he spoke made it clear just what a wonderful, approachable person he is. I realised, I guess because he's on the radio, people must have already started realising that he's a bit of a rare bird and worth talking to. There was a little plaque on the wall by the road which said S. Shaw, Cutler. So I knew I was in the right place. And when I arrived, he had no idea that I was coming. And he kind of welcomed me into the workshop, and it was an incredibly basic workshop. There was pieces of cardboard on broken windows, and he even had a fireplace down one end.
So how did Stan respond?
He was 70, maybe something like that, and he told me that he was just too old to take on an apprentice at that stage. It was a bit devastating for me, but he gave me a whole load of springs and blades and told me to go away and figure it out myself, and that he was always there if I needed help in the future. If not that day, then the next day, walked up and down the streets, starting in a circle around Stan's workshop, trying to find somewhere where I could set up my bench with very few tools, and no knowledge is a completely different kettle of fish. And at that point, I realised that scissors were harder than they looked.
Well, Amazing Grace, like our stork here, made the sky her limit. She became a scissor maker, and it turns out she's a natural.
So I tend to make one-off pieces, and very often they're historically inspired. I had a really interesting commission a few years ago by a left-handed tailor down in Savile Row, and he wanted a pair of 13-inch, which is a large pair of left-handed shears. He'd only ever seen one before. It must have been a hand-forged pair. So I then had to find out how these things would have been done in a pre-industrial setting, and then remaking them in a contemporary way. I love high-risk making. So if I'm making something and I'm not entirely sure that I have the skills to finish it, I love that. I think
that's the Sheffield way. Our steel city makers set the standard for generations.
We mustn't increase our output at the expense of quality. It may be a way of making quick money, but in the long run it means we've had it. It's up to all of us, Furnivals, Turnbulls and the rest, to make quite sure that the stamp "Made in Sheffield" on a knife, fork or spoon means as much in the future as it's always done in the past.
Makes me feel proud of Sheffield, of Stan and of Grace, and everyone who keeps the flame alive. Thanks to Sheffield Magic, Grace is a scissor supremo, and the orders are flying in for our newest rare bird.